Good afternoon. Welcome once again to the Week in Review. This is on ilovemelville.live, and glad to have all of you watching back with us. My panel today, Piet Krookamp, Dr. Piet Krookamp, University of Northwest University. Hello, Piet. And Dawie Rood. And Dawie is from the Efficient Group, one of our foremost and well-known or best-known economists, and somebody who I hope we can depend on to be as clear and as direct as he usually is on any of our programs. So Dawie, welcome, and let's get the ball rolling. And I think what I'd like to talk about today in today's program, first of all, we've had a lot of economic or financial information coming through in the last week, 2 weeks. And also a lot of different interpretations of what was going on there, a lot of doomsayers, and then other people coming out with what I thought was over-enthusiastic optimism, to put it very mildly. So somewhere along the line, we've got to find the balance in this and really start looking ahead, because the country is in trouble. We know that. What needs to be looked at, I think, is how do we fix this? But Dawie, let's just look at the facts. Where are we? We heard that horrendous figure of a 51% tumbling in the economy, which was misinterpreted, I thought, and a lot of other people spoke up about that. So maybe that's a good place to start. Things are bad enough. We don't have to actually exaggerate it either.
Hello, Clovis. Yes, very nice joining you. Hello, my colleague, Piet. Also nice talking to you. Maybe I could just try to unpack this number, the minus 51% in the second quarter. But remember, when you talk about the second quarter's economic growth number, minus 51, but it's always a big but. This number is real. This number is seasonally adjusted. This number is quarter on quarter, and this number is annualized. Now, that is quite a lot. Essentially, what we're trying to do, economists usually, when we talk about a number like this, is that we try to strip out things like, for example, the effect of inflation. That's a so-called real number. We try to strip out the effect of seasons, because there's quite a seasonality when you look at economic numbers. So, for instance, everybody's going on holiday in December, and very few people are going on holiday in February, and you cannot compare holidays in February to December, for example. So that's an example where we strip out the seasonality. We try to smooth it out over time. And then the big thing is that we try to analyze this. So basically what it comes down to is we try to say that, calculate that if the economy keeps on performing in the second quarter, and if the economy keeps on performing like that for the full year, then the economy will contract by 51%. Now, which is perhaps a bit of an unfair comparison or unfair measurement of the economy, because the idea of this specific formula is to calculate the underlying momentum in the economy under kind of normal circumstances. Now, this is nothing but, this is very unnormal that we're currently experiencing. So perhaps that's not the right way of looking at this specific way of calculating economic growth in the second quarter. So another way of doing this is, so instead of looking at it in an annualized basis, we can simply compare it to the first quarter, where all the normal adjustments, adjust for inflation, quarter on quarter, adjust for seasonal factors, but we do not analyze it. I know it sounds a little bit complicated, but essentially it's not that difficult to do. In fact, economists always try to make things a little bit more too complicated. But if we do not analyze this, then the economy actually contracted by only 16% in the second quarter. It doesn't really matter which one of these measurements you use. The most important thing is that you have to be consistent, whatever you try to use. We usually use the first method that I've explained. And it doesn't matter whether you use the first or the second method. The reality is that this economy has never, ever been so deep in trouble. The contraction in economic growth has been absolutely horrendous. In fact, I think the third quarter is probably going to be a positive quarter. But the reason why it's going to be a positive quarter is simply because the second quarter was such a horrible number. And I still stick to my number that I think the economy is going to contract by about 10% for the year in total. So it doesn't really matter which one of the numbers you use. It's just all sort of economic brouhaha and a lot of statistical noise. The reality is the economy has contracted. I mean, I can't find words for this. I don't think we are in a recession. I think we are in a very, very deep depression, and it's not possible to overstate the fact that we are in a really, really deep trouble. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense. I've done another calculation, and that is that perhaps it's better to look at it on a per capita GDP basis. And for the past 4 or 5 years, we've been getting poorer on a per capita basis. And this year, the per capita income of the average South African will fall by approximately 15%. That's big. We're talking about in real time numbers. We're talking about a huge increase in unemployment and a huge increase in poverty. And we can talk about the state's numbers as well. So it's not only individuals and businesses that are suffering. The state's finances are also under tremendous pressure. I hope that make more or less sense, Kobus.
Absolutely. Pete, you happy with that?
Yeah, David, tell me, if we take COVID out of the equation, say for this quarter, of course, we will still have to experience the consequences of COVID. If we take it out of the equation and just to get some idea of how much will the economy decline in any case, take it out of the equation, what would that be?
Okay, so let's assume you use the first method, the so-called quarter-on-quarter seasonally adjusted annualized number. And remember, just a very important point, Pete, and that is that the virus didn't have any impact on the economy, or just about no impact on the economy. It is the measures that have been put in place to contain the virus that is impacting on the economy. That's important to understand this, and that's why I'm completely and totally against this lockdown. It's gone on far too long. More people will die because of an increase in poverty than people that will die from a virus. But coming back to your question, the first quarter's contraction was approximately 2% on the normal way that we usually calculate economic growth. And I would guess that the second quarter would have been more or less the same, around about 2% contraction. Instead of the 51%, we would have seen an economic contraction minus 3% perhaps even, but certainly not the minus 10% or something like that. So I would say that the bulk of this huge economic crash, you can use it, or depression, is without a doubt, the bulk of that has to do with the measures that have been put in place to contain the virus.
Do you have any idea in terms of the numbers, unemployment, what will be the increase and in what sectors it should be?
Without the lockdown. Without the lockdown, what we probably
as it is now. What exactly? What numbers do you think we're not going to get back? We say we lost, argument's sake, 1.5 million people are unemployed now, and say we can get 500,000 back into employment again. In which sectors will that be?
Okay, so let me just give you some of the big numbers, and one or two numbers that's really concerning to me. The one is that we've lost approximately 3 million jobs already, of which probably 1 to 1.5 million jobs will be permanent. That's jobs that will not be regained for a number of years. By the end of this year, we will start employing some more people. So we've lost, let's call it 1 to 1.5 million jobs. We've probably lost about 100,000 businesses that's closed down. One of the numbers that stood out for me is that we saw a contraction of 75% in manufacturing in the second quarter. Now, that is particularly concerning to me, is because we've seen the South African economy deindustrializing for many years, in fact. And that is important for us because of the high levels of unemployment. And the secondary sector, especially manufacturing, that's a typical sector that we want to grow because that's where we can potentially create more jobs. So that is very concerning to me. 75% contraction in the second quarter. Of course, the third quarter will bounce back, but that's a massive one. And then something else that's even more concerning to me is that we saw in the second quarter that investments or capital formation, or that is basically the base that you form for future economic growth, that contracted by 60%. So that tells me that although we will see obviously an acceleration in economic growth compared to the second quarter over the next couple of quarters, but it's not nearly enough to really get us back to where we were, say, a year or so ago. So a contraction of 60% in investments in economy in the second quarter, that is something that is hugely concerning. I haven't even touched on the effect on the state, on the fiscus, because the fiscal deficit is, as we all know, is going to get close to 17% of GDP. The debt levels are going to get close to 85% of GDP, and that sort of numbers. But if you want to point to one specific number. Those two are the ones that I'm concerned, very much concerned about: manufacturing contraction and investments in the economy.
David, the rand is holding up. Why?
The rand's not holding up. Remember, the rand is probably the weakest currency in the world. The rand has taken a massive knock. And the financial markets are very, very clever, and the financial markets, to a large extent, discounted much of this. They are, maybe the rand is a little bit stronger than what it would have been if South Africa was a different country. And the reason for that is that there are some other factors that is certainly working in our favor. The one is the fact that the currency is weak, because a foreigner can enter your country relatively cheap, so you can enter South Africa cheaply. Secondly, especially our capital market offers very, very juicy yields. So you can get a yield of approximately 10% on the 10-year bonds in South Africa. Compare that to the Germans, where you have to pay the Germans if you want to lend money to their government. So in South Africa, at least we pay you 10%. That is very, very attractive. And the third factor is the fact that the South African financial markets are very, very liquid. So if a foreigner wants to come in and take a bite out of the apple, you enter cheaply, you get a juicy yield, and you've got a very liquid market. And I won't be surprised if we see the rand actually in the short term appreciating. But I'm telling you, most of the other numbers in South Africa are very, very much negative. And I have no doubt over the medium longer term, the rand's going to move in one direction only, and that's south.
We are being told that the reason why inflation is low is because the demand is low. Are there any other reasons?
Yeah. Now, that's a very important point that you're making. Again, if you look at the GDP numbers in the second quarter, there are two ways of looking at it. It's the so-called demand side and the production side of the economy. And if you look at the demand side of the economy, demand in the economy, private consumption expenditure, and that is basically what you and I do. We're buying stuff, especially on the luxury and semi-luxury goods. The contraction there was approximately 50%. So people are simply not buying. That's one reason. So there's a collapse in demand in the economy. And if there's a collapse in demand in the economy, it's very difficult for businesses to pass on price increases. But there are some other reasons. The fact that the oil price also recently came under quite a lot of pressure, recently went up a little bit. So imported prices are not that, upward pressure is not that much. And also some changes in consumption patterns in the economy, like people are buying significantly less fuel. People are buying less of other things, like, for example, cigarettes and alcohol recently. They're supposed to be. And of course, another very important reason is that demand for credit. People are simply not borrowing money to spend on things because people are scared. And if you're scared, you don't buy a new car. And if you don't buy a new car, then a car salesman can't increase the prices of cars, as an example. So there's a combination of reasons, and I believe that the inflation rate is likely to remain fairly low for the next 18 months, perhaps 2 years or so. But thereafter, I'm afraid we're probably going to see an inflation problem in South Africa. So
with the interest rates so low, will you buy a house?
It's not a bad idea. And I must tell you, when this crisis, at the beginning of this crisis, I was making all sort of predictions, like all economists trying to figure out what's going on. It's very difficult to make predictions in the current environment because we've never seen anything like this before. And one of these, my prediction is that we're going to see a significant fall in property prices. And we've seen in some kinds of property a significant fall, but I'm very surprised to see a lot of activity in the retail in a residential market. So we've seen a lot of activity happening in the residential market. Now, sitting back a moment and thinking why that could be, the obvious reason is that people are changing in all sort of manners. People are working from home, and if you want to work from home, you want to have a nice place to stay, if you can afford it, of course. And if you work from a flat, for instance, then you want at least a little bit more comfort. If you stay at home, so there's a lot of people are actually moving out of the bigger cities and they're moving to the beach houses because you can just as well do stuff on the internet, like what we're doing at the moment, for instance. So there's a lot of much more activity in a residential market. So if you want to buy, are you going to buy a house anyway if you want to stay somewhere? So why not buy a house now? I would buy a house, yes. I won't invest in that much in South Africa. I'm not a big bull on property. If you really want to invest in property, I would rather go for listed property. But if you want to stay something, you want to have your own property, I think now is perhaps not a bad idea. Interest rates are very, very low.
The stock markets have rebounded a bit, isn't it? Are they back where they've been, and are there still some cheap deals there?
Remember, the stock markets are quite obviously there is some correlation between how the financial markets react and the real economy. So if the economy came under pressure, and exactly what happened is that when a lockdown was announced, the financial markets collapsed. We saw a crash on the JSE and all sort of the other financial markets as well. But soon thereafter, even before we saw this massive contraction in the second quarter, the financial markets were up and running and all happy again. And it's important to understand that financial markets are always forward-looking. Financial markets are discounting what's going to happen in future. So that's one. And the second one is that we have to understand is that especially the big central banks in the world, the Fed in the US and the European central banks and the other ones like the Japanese and even the Chinese, they really went out of their way to pump massive amounts of liquidity into the world's financial markets. And when you talk about the South African JSEs, for instance, we have more than 60% of the JSE is actually earned abroad. So they're doing business internationally. So whatever happens internationally will be good or bad for most of our big companies in South Africa as well. So the JSE is up where it was before the crash, but they're running mostly on stimulus, monetary policy stimulus, but also fiscal policy stimulus. And I must be honest, I'm getting a little bit concerned about the international equity markets, and that means also in the local equity markets. I think they could be a little bit on the rich side. I do not think the world economy is going to get out of this quickly. But in the meantime, you will be, it's only a fool that will take on the Fed. The Fed decided that they're going to pump liquidity into these financial markets and never pick a fight with the Fed.
Now, Darby, we've looked at all these terrible figures and the implications, and it's all doom and gloom right now. But as I said, somewhere along the line, we've got to turn this around. Somewhere along the line, and in any country where you have entrepreneurs and people pushed into a corner where they can't get out without actually just starting to fight back, where's that going to come from? What's going to turn around, and how are we going to do it? What should we be doing?
Okay, Kobus, if we do nothing, let's see what's going to happen. It's quite easy to understand what's going to happen if we do nothing, because we've seen this many times before, many countries in the world. Of course, pretty much like Tolstoy, or rather unlike Tolstoy, all the unhappy countries are not unhappy in the same way. Unhappy countries go unhappy pretty much in the same way. And we go unhappy by, first of all, running out of taxpayers. Secondly, running out of capital. Now, we've run out of taxpayers already. You can't increase taxes because the tax burden is simply not, it cannot be, the taxpayer is overburdened already. Then you run out of capital. We've run out of capital. We've destroyed our capital, and that's Eskom, for example, South African Airways, for example, PRASA, just the list goes on. This destructive government has run out of capital because they've consumed much of the capital. There's always more to consume, but they've consumed much of the capital. The third port of call is to dip in an only pot of gold that is left, and that's the savers. And there's talk about prescribed assets. So prescribed assets, I think, will become a reality, and eventually the whole party always ends the same, and that's with very high levels of inflation. So that's where we're heading. So how can we stop this? Well, there's only one way to stop that, and that is for the state to spend less. That's, of course, a political question. It's not an economic question. The economic answer is very easy and very easy to understand. The state must spend less. And unfortunately, because of the mismanagement of the fiscal accounts in the past, we do not have the option of actually supporting the South African economy because the state finances are in a fiscal debt trap already. So we must spend less, and if we do that, we're going to force this economy into an even deeper and a longer recession. But that's the only option because we don't have another option. But before we can do that, we have to answer some political questions. The one political question is, who's in charge? I don't know who's in charge. The second political question, what is the ideology of the tripartite alliance? I also do not know what their ideology is. And the third one is, will they be able to contain organized labor, specifically COSATU? Because if you want to spend less money, you have to tell COSATU to tell their members that we're going to spend less on the wage bill, for instance. And we know COSATU is not they're very well organized. They're not necessarily very productive, but they can be very, very destructive. And the political leadership knows that. So those are the political questions that needs to be answered. And only once we've answered those questions, we've got, and we know who's in charge and what ideology they're following and who's going to make sure that the COSATU tail is not wagging the dog anymore, only then will we be able to do what needs to happen, and that's for the state to spend less money. And then we have to prepare for the pain that's going to follow, because that's inevitable. Either we take the pain by way of less state spending, or we are going to take the pain because of very high levels of inflation. And I'm afraid we passed a position where we have choices. Those are the only two options. But I'm afraid our political leadership, I'm afraid, probably not. It's probably going to go for the inflation option, I think.
Okay, David.
What do you think?
We know you have some feeling now what the Minister of Finance is all about. He's not much of a political animal. Sometimes I'm not totally convinced of his acumen as far as understanding complex economies is concerned, but he's certainly a better Minister of Finance than many we had before. You're in issues now. You know the political landscape. You know the nature of Ramaphosa. You know there's COSATU. You know that you can't stop the leakage, the bleeding at provincial and local government level. What he has done is he's just said, "Oh, well, I don't have money, so I'm not going to fund SAA. I'm not going to fund the SABC, etc." What will you do? What will be the things that you will be doing if you say, "Well, I know I can't change the political landscape"? What will you be doing? You're Tito Mboweni now.
If I'm the Minister of Finance, what I will do, I'll jump. That's what I will do. Because as you know this much better than me in this, that you can't fix this thing called the ANC. It's one massive patronage. It's one corrupt, incompetent, rotting carcass. That is what the ANC is today. And you can't fix it anymore. If I was Tito Mboweni, and in fact, I believe he's going to jump. I don't think he will be able
to. I don't give you the luxury to jump. I want to force you into a corner. What do you do if you can't jump?
Well, what I will do, if I was the Minister of Finance, I will call a press conference and I will sit in front of all those journalists and I will tell the journalists and tell them, listen, we are in seriously deep trouble. The only way out of this is to cut state spending, is to cut the wage bill, and I'm going to do that. And if you don't allow me to do that, I am going to jump. That's what he must do. He must put the pressure on Cyril Ramaphosa. So Cyril Ramaphosa must know that he must start supporting his Minister of Finance, because I also do not believe he supports his own Minister of Finance. After the emergency budget, for instance, I would have liked to see the president standing up and say, this is my Minister of Finance. After this loan from the IMF, I would have liked to see the president signing this document, going to the IMF, promising the IMF that we're going to fix the state finances. He did not do that. He's a weak president.
Okay, but David, Tito Mboweni, at least there wasn't increases for the salaries for government officials, and he didn't give money to SAA, and he refused to give money to SABC. So he's doing what you're saying already, but more needs to be done. I agree with you. I think me and Theo Venter had an argument about this, and he thinks that the president actually do support the Minister of Finance. I said I don't see any of that. Okay, so now he's doing nothing. Nothing is a very important way that he deals with the problem. I just don't have the money. So what beyond that? He's done that now. He's not giving them any more money. What beyond that can he do?
He is in fact giving them more money. What he's doing, the so-called 160 billion that he's going to take off the wage bill is no deduction on the wage bill. What he's doing is not going to give them future increases. That's all he's doing. What he needs to do is to tell them, I'm going to cut your salaries. I'm going to give you less. That's what he needs to do. He's not only telling us that he's not going to give us huge increases in future. That's not good enough. He must tell us we're going to give you less money. We're going to cut your salary by 20%. That's what he needs to do. That's not all he needs to do. What he needs to do is stand up and say, listen, I'm going to close down South African Airways. I refuse to give them any more money. That's not all. He must stand up and say, listen, I'm going to stop giving money to Eskom or to PRASA or to airport company, all those parasitals. That's what he needs to do. And he must draw us a line in the sand to say, listen, I need my president to support me. And I need my president to stand up and to understand we do not have the money. If we do not do what I'm telling you to do, we are going to get into very deep trouble. I guess that's the only thing he can do. And if that doesn't work, he must jump and he must join somebody else to show how serious he is in trying to save this South African economy.
How long before we will fail state? How long before we fail state?
Many years. No, many years. I said that inflation is probably going to be a problem. For some time, not going to be a problem because of Nt'Sekhe, who is doing an excellent job. Nt'Sekhe, for various reasons, I think in 18 months' time, we will see inflation accelerating. I think Nt'Sekhe will start increasing interest rates. Now, if you think there's pressure on the Reserve Bank now, just wait and see in 18 months' time when the Reserve Bank starts increasing interest rates, what the kind of pressure will be on Nt'Sekhe. Well, so the central bank is still there, the Reserve Bank is still there. So let's see what's going to happen there. I think a failed state is a very strong word. A failed state is certainly, you will answer that better, I guess, depending on your definition for that. But we still have a degree of law and order. We still have an independent judiciary. We have an independent press, like you guys are doing exactly now. The Reserve Bank, like I've said. So many things are still working. This is not a failed state. But I can promise you, if you keep on doing this, remember, Pete, look at this. There are 22 million people in South Africa, 22 million people in South Africa that receive a paycheck from the state every month. 22 million. Now imagine getting 22 million people, getting them to be very angry. Now that's going to be very tough because it's inevitable. There are far more people receiving a paycheck from the state today than people actually with real jobs. There are 14 million people with real jobs. That's the private sector. 22 million people totally dependent on the state. These numbers simply are totally unsustainable. But it's failed state, not there yet. Quite some time before we get there.
Pete, I want to turn this on you now for a moment. You've been asking a lot of questions, but you're a political expert as well. So listening to what Davi's been saying, you think that we're going to see something from Cyril Ramaphosa at last? Or is it going to be business as usual, which to me sounds as though, if he does go on like he has been, we're not going to turn the ship around.
Kobus, I don't think he's doing nothing. I just think what he has to do is very difficult in the first place. In the second place is, if he does what we want him to do, he will be out of a job in around about 6 months. It's almost like when people said when he was the deputy president, yes, but all the corruption is happening and he's doing nothing. If he did something, he would have been dropped as deputy president and he would never have been president, and we might have had David Mabuza. So we must just be careful what we wish for sometimes. And I don't think he's doing nothing. Yes, I agree that it happens very slowly, but some of the things that they are blamed for, he simply can't do. He can't rush the NPA. He's given them more money, he allowed them to appoint more people, he has appointed at the top echelons better people. Some of the things he can do and some of the things he can't do. The system is so dilapidated, it's so broken, it's so gone, it's so captured that it is impossible, I think, to do the things that we want him to do. I don't think Ace Magashule is worth as much as people think. I don't think Latulia has that much influence. But I do think that it's quite possible that there will be a form of a revolt within the National Executive Committee, and they just need the right people to speak up. Not most of the people. They need the right people. Now it's Tony Ngeni. He's a puppet. Nobody cares what he says. But if Gwedi Mantashe turns against you, if one or two of your cabinet ministers turn against you, there's a real chance that he could be removed, and he knows that. So he needs to balance that. Either I'm removed or I move at the pace that my enemies and my opponents can tolerate or can live with, and I need to change the system very slowly. Unfortunately, we pay economic price for that, and I don't know if we have the money to pay the political price that we're doing. I know Davi is right in that respect. We're in serious trouble. But I just think if I look at the personality of Ramaphosa, too often it's been said he's not doing anything. That's people who ignore the complexities, the diversity, the contradictions that's within the ANC, and the possibility. Remember, they removed 2 of their presidents. They can remove the 3rd one.
We've run out of time, really, but I need one more answer then from Davi, because as Pete says, it's going to take time. My question to you is, Davi, do we have time? How much time do we have?
No, Kobus, if you look at the fiscal accounts, I do a lot of work on the fiscal accounts. We're going to end fiscal deficit, the debt levels at 85% of GDP. That trajectory that Tito Mboweni showed us during its emergency budget. We're not going to see that. The fiscal accounts are going to fall apart. And if the fiscal accounts fall apart, that is the glue that keeps South Africa together. That is going to fall apart. So, Pete, I hear what you're saying. They can recall him, but we are in a crisis here. He's the president. Act like a president. Go on TV and say, listen, people, this is going to be tough. Follow me. I'm going to lead you through this. We're going to get out on the other side, and we will be in one piece, but it's going to be tough. Follow me. He's not saying that. I'm afraid he's a weak president. I hear what you're saying, but I'm afraid we simply do not have the time.
It's Dawie Ruet from the Efficient Group, and with us on the program also today, Piet Krokamp from Northwest University. And well, have a nice week. We'll be talking to you again next Sunday at 5 o'clock.